was just going to wing it. I've never had that many people want to talk to me before. So
why prepare? Just wing it.
That's Jeff's motto anyway, right?
So not my motto. Okay, I'm being painted with an awfully broad brush. So
no, I'm just joking.
There's a time and a place for preparation, but then once you've done the prep work, it's time to show up and be present and do what you got to do. So
that's right.
Yeah. So all right, Christy. I mean, there's 5 of us. When do you want to start?
All right, let's start. Let's just do it. We'll let people will come in, and we'll if we get too big, we'll have everybody mute unless you're talking. But for now, if there's just the 5 of us, I think this will be great. So, do we want to? Should I kick it off, or we're just in? At this point, people will know what they're dialing in for, and we can start.
I think that's a good thing. I think that's a good place to go.
Okay. So what I will start with is that we are here for the January 2018 edition of the Why and the Buy book club discussion. And our book, if you are watching on video, is the Icarus Deception. Note my Post-it notes, Jeff, in the book.
Someone prepared.
Yeah, well, there exactly. This is my MO, right? So. We don't really have a lot of structure here. I've got a couple of questions if we want to go through them, but we picked this book primarily because our theme for the month of January is purpose. Everything that we've talked about in our thought leader episodes, our success story episodes for January has been all around purpose. Why do you do what you do? And Jeff said, well, if we're going to talk purpose, I want to talk about the Icarus Deception because it changed my life. I mean, you can't get much better than that when it comes to a testimonial. So I thought Jeff, you could kick it off and tell us a little bit about the book for those who haven't read it, and why it had such an impact on you.
So where do I start? This is my copy of the book. It has not been opened.
He did listen to it. I do know he's done his homework.
The reason this book has not been opened is it's probably the 10th copy I've bought. I've given this book to a lot of people. 9 apparently. I can count on one hand the number of books that have changed my life. The Icarus Deception is one of them. I can tell you the Little Red Book of Selling is another one. I can tell you there's probably a couple of more that I can't think of off the top of my head, but there aren't very many more. And the message is so simple. And I read this or listened to it at a time. So it was released December 31st, 2012, it was a Kickstarter campaign that Seth Godin decided to start. And he released 3 books on the same day. The Icarus Deception is one. Another one is this book called V is for Vulnerable, which is written like a children's book, but is very, very powerful. And if you listen to the audio, the audible.com version of the Icarus Deception, it's included at the end. And the other one I have on my iPad, it's called What You Gonna Do with That Duck? And it was probably mid to late December, mid to late 2012 when I finally started listening or following Seth Godin. I had actually read some of his books before. Here was this person who was interested in the concepts behind marketing and how to do it right and how to do work that matters. And at that time, I'm trying to put the years together. I was finishing my 4th full year with the company I was with. So it was about 4.5 years that I was there. 2013 ended up being a really big year for me in terms of what I was able to accomplish. But 2012 was kind of a landmark year in my career. So I had done well enough in my sales career to start paying attention to the power that I was developing within the organization. I was starting to become aware of the things that I was doing that other people weren't doing, and starting to really recognize that those things that I was doing differently were the reasons that I had the capability to be successful beyond what I had ever been capable of before. at the same time, I realized I was making more money than I had ever possibly dreamed of. And it pales in comparison to a lot of the people that I work and interact with today. But coming out of college, making $15.21 an hour and being ecstatic that was top of the scale for where my profession was, there was just this shift in kind of my consciousness, although that's a very grandiose concept, into what I was capable of. And then here comes this book. It says, you're capable of more than you can imagine, and the only thing holding you back is you. Well, why don't you pick yourself off the floor at that point and start paying attention? And listening to it is powerful. And I think I like audiobooks that are read by the author, because all the emphasis is in the right places. It's as if they can stop and just a pause for a brief moment right where they know they need to, that a voice actor can't. And I think what resonated with me was the pace and the temperance with which Seth performed this book. And I've been a loyal devotee ever since. What You Gonna Do with That Duck was released the same day. I haven't gotten through it. That's one of his kind of collections of his blogs. And what you notice is if you read his blog every day, eventually you've read about half of his books. But the really powerful part at the beginning of that book too, which is about getting started and doing more work that matters, is having all your ducks in a row is a really great thing. But what you do with them is far more important. And that plays into purpose. It plays into preparation. It plays into everything. And so this confluence of books and works and materials all coming around at the same time was really powerful to me. And that's why I think the timing of this is probably as important as the work itself. And, the book itself it starts with the metaphor of the story of Icarus, the mythological story of Icarus. And Icarus was given wings. They were wings made of wax, fashioned by his father. I'm sorry, they were wings. They were fastened to his feet by wax. And the half of the story that we hear is that you're not supposed to fly too close to the sun, because if you get too close to the heat, the wax will melt and you'll fall into the ocean. But what Seth says has been held from us is the idea that you're not supposed to fly too close to the sea, because the waves will crash and interfere with the wings and aerodynamics and all that stuff, and you'll face an equally devastating fate. And that idea is kind of played out. And if you pay attention to Seth Godin, he's the anti-industrialist, right? Do work that matters to other people because it matters, not because you can make average products for average people at an average margin. And it just, as I mentioned before, the timing when it all came up to me, I took it as a challenge from him to do work that mattered because it was worth doing, not just stay in this same job because it's a better paying job than you ever thought you'd have, not just staying at it and doing it mediocre in a mediocre manner because you were pretty good at it, but to really challenge yourself to be the best version of myself that I could be. And I love that there are metaphors throughout that compare us to the gods. And I've not thought about it this way. And this is what came about as I listened to it most recently, was how often those metaphors keep coming up. We're kind of taught from an early age not to think of ourselves as gods. But when you look into the stories, especially the mythological stories of gods, all of the gods are flawed in one way or another. And there's a different god for a different strength. And each god has their own flaw as well. They're there to be caricatures, not statues. And I think when you can look at every god as having a human quality, we can see more of ourselves in those gods. So that's kind of the context that I've seen it in. And I've been talking long enough. Somebody else's turn.
Well, I thought it was interesting. I loved the very first story after he explains Icarus. He talks about catching the wily fox. And how, you kind of keep moving the fence a little bit until the fence is ultimately gone, but the sheep still think that they're in the fence, and how interesting that metaphor applies to a lot of the things that we do on a day-to-day basis. I mean, I think about my fence being kind of doing the right thing, whatever the right thing is, right? So tell me the rules, tell me how to be successful, and I will be your best performer ever. I spent 25 years of my career doing exactly that, doing exactly what was required. And every time I would try and push the boundaries, the whole system would try and push back from with that. And so he explains that all through the book. But I'm interested, Scott, Katie, Camille, what did you discover when you went through this book? Or did you have fences that you had created for yourself that kind of came to light when you went through this? Camille, you're on mute. There we go.
There we go. Sorry. I think you're alluding to my favorite quote of the book, which is, if you ask for the rule book, you really are just secretly wanting to be a middle manager. And I don't know that that ever made sense to me until A, I read the book, and B, it was the right time and all of the things aligned. So I think if I could draw anything out of that, it is A, knowing that the institution keeps you from flying too close to the sun, and kind of all of your humility comes to keeping you kind of low to the ground as well. So you never really have the ability to move outside of those boundaries. But once you recognize that they're fake and they're false and they're self-supported, right? Because no one's telling you every day that you can only do so much. You just kind of believe that over the course of time. Anyway, so those are my kind of takeaways from a higher level. But the middle manager quote was just
spot on. Yeah, I'm like, oh, wow. I spent a lot of years doing exactly that. Thankfully, not for the best few. But what about you, Scott?
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting to watch the evolution of Seth's writing, right? So I've been reading him since, my God, like Permission Marketing and Purple Cow and all that stuff, right? So it really started as marketing, but he's absolutely been on this, I don't know what it is, like personal empowerment kind of thing that maybe started with Linchpin or something like that. So in a lot of ways, and Jeff, I think you articulated it well. I mean, I've been reading his blog for years too. And so a lot of this felt like, okay, yeah, I'm listening to Seth Godin. And I also listened, right? So, and I only got one listen, which was a little less than I had hoped. I'd hoped to kind of go back through. So, you know, I certainly believe in a lot of what he's sharing with the broader message of, you just have to own it. You have to be creative. I like the way that he talks about art. And, you know, when I think about the top performers that I interview on my show, I think that's probably the most consistent theme, is they have just sort of figured out what those special, unique things are, and what everybody else thinks, be damned. This is who I am. This is what works for me. I'm going to do the hell out of this and run circles around you. And you can ask questions if you want, but, you know, criticize if you want. It doesn't matter. I'm going to keep going. But the one thing I sort of took out, really random, weird things. And the element that is just stuck with me, and I haven't solved for it, but it's completely intriguing me. He was talking about the connection economy, and he talks about attention and trust. And I think in the sales perspective, it feels to me like that's basically the whole game, especially as we start to compete with robots. You know, it's going to come down to that. And, you know, what it's causing me to think about, like I said, I don't have the answers, but maybe there's some discussion here, is how do you get that? First, there's kind of chicken and the egg, right? I kind of feel like the trust comes first before the attention. It's a lot easier to get attention once you have trust. A prospect client perspective, really hard to open the door and get that first conversation with a prospect. Once somebody's your client, you're doing business with them, it's really easy to get another conversation with them or get a meeting with them, certainly in comparison. Right? And so I'm just trying to think about, how can you develop trust in that way, in a way that you can earn attention in a meaningful and applicable way in a sales context.
You know, it's, and I know you distill top performers for a living, basically. And I think that contrasts very well with Camille's comment. And Scott, you only got through the book once because you have no snow to shovel, and which is
okay.
why
I'll stop complaining about being cold.
which is why I got got through it so quickly. The top performers are able to do it in a way, and they're clever enough to get it done in a way that's going to make their own middle managers proud of them. Because what managers want and what companies want and why they keep people down is because they don't mind you being a top performer as long as you're predictable. And if you are predictable, they'd actually rather you be more mediocre and not a top performer, because they know exactly where you are. They are keeping that fence construct available and intact. And they don't want you to color outside the lines. Even if coloring outside the lines makes a prettier picture, they like it neat and tidy, and everything has its place, and there's a place for everything, and the puppet master is at work, and they like it that way. And I think that what you've discovered, Scott, and talking to a lot of those people, I know there are as many conversations that happen off the air as on, is top performers kind of make their own rules. And they break some of those rules with a certain amount of impunity, so that they're allowed a little bit of creative license sometimes. But ultimately, if they step too far out of line, there's friction, there are issues, and there are things like that. And I think it's a really interesting balancing act. And I want to make sure we get Katie's take on this too, but it's a really interesting balancing act to see someone who does it as well as they do it, to be and you're not talking about the top insurance rep in the family-owned agency, right? You're talking enterprise people, you're talking huge companies. They're playing a different game. And I think there are lessons to be learned from the fact that if you're playing a different game, what you can really do if you give yourself permission to color outside the lines. And that's what Seth does with the connection economy. He says, no, it's not about permission. It's about necessity, because safe is the new risky. Rather be sorry than safe, because to step outside the mold a little bit and do something that's worth doing, even though it might not work. That's the only way we're ever going to push anything forward, because everything else has been so homogenized. And safe is fine, but you know what happens, especially in sales? What are the things that companies are trying to automate? The stuff where people don't differentiate themselves. And you have to be able to differentiate yourself. And in order to differentiate yourself, there's risk in that. Because we like this, we're just like this other company, only cheaper. We can do exactly what you're doing right now, but we can cut 5% off your cost, because we can increase your efficiency, because we automated something that wasn't previously automated. There's a limit to that. And the only thing worse than winning the race to the bottom is finishing second. And Katie, what did you take?
Well, given that I have not read anything.
Oh yeah, that's right. What are you getting from all this?
A couple of things. One is, as I'm anxious to read the book, I too have been following Seth for forever and ever and always. So there's bits and pieces of what you're saying that I'm familiar with from his blog post. To give you a little bit of my spin on what I'm hearing is, I, for one, am not a rule player. I have been self-employed for over 30 years. So I color outside the lines always and don't play nicely in corporate settings. The last time I had a, quote, real job was in 2010, and that lasted 7 months because I don't adhere to the rules. So kudos to Seth for saying you need to break the rules, and yes, there's risk in that. Part of that risk is breaking the rules. The other thing is being vulnerable, which I was not familiar with his children's book, so I appreciate, or not his children's book, but the V is for vulnerable. And I think that that's what sets apart the top performers in whatever industry. They have stretched the boundaries and they're not feeling fenced in.
So Katie, I have a question, just knowing what you do. So you coach primarily those in a creative field or creative professionals, as you describe it. How often do you find people who are struggling to get comfortable coloring outside the lines?
99% of the time. My inability, as theirs, to advance where I want to be, or for them to advance where they want to be, is fear. And nobody enjoys character building just for the sake of character building. You know, it's, oh yeah, let me go cross this boundary, woohoo. Anytime I have acted out, it's because of necessity. Where I was no longer comfortable. And so I had to do something to shake it up. Most of my clients are very content to stay where they are and whine about where they are. Does that sound familiar to anybody?
Yep. Have a few clients like that myself.
Yeah, the nice thing about that is, hey, it's steady money. The bad thing about that is nobody changes, and then I become bored and irritated and begin to act in a passive aggressive manner that makes them go away.
Yeah, absolutely.
And none of this has nothing to do with Seth's book.
It has everything.
Actually, yeah, no,
everything.
you just described like the first third of the book, so you're good.
I can start in the middle.
And it's the entire book is really kind of divided into some pretty palpable sections. I mean, the first portion of the book is all about how we've been more or less coerced into this feeling of safety and into this feeling of, you know what, I can just show up and do my job and it's an honest day's pay for an honest day's work. And that didn't used to be the case 60 or 70 years ago. That was not the case. And then you've got the rise of industry and the middle class and automation and all these things, and people kind of showing up and then realizing that if they're just willing to show up and work hard, then someone will pay them for it. And if you work hard enough, you're going to do good enough work to continue to get paid. And I think that's where recently, maybe the last 10 or 15 years, people, this concept of hustle, this concept of, well, I'm just going to do more. All right, you're going to work 8 hours a day. I'm going to work 9 hours a day. Well, if you're going to work 9 hours a day, I'm going to work 10 hours a day. There is a finite amount of time that we can work. And it's probably, reasonably speaking, less than what a lot of us are working. And we're starting to see that pendulum move backwards because there's a limit to what we're physically able to produce. Well, that means that we need to do mental work. It means that we need to do creative work. That means that we can do things in, 30 seconds that some other people, it would take hours and hours to do. Well, does that make the work less valuable because it didn't take someone as long to create? I was listening to another book actually, and there was a story about I think it was Diego Rivera. No, it was Pablo Picasso, and he was at a cafe and was just doing Picasso stuff. And so he's sketching on a napkin, just doing his thing, and he gets up and he goes to throw the napkin away. And there's a woman sitting there. She says, "Oh my gosh, you're Pablo Picasso." He says, "Yeah." He says, "Can I have that napkin?" And he says, "Well, yeah, you can buy it." She said, "How much?" He said, $20,000. And she, of course, was like, "No, you're just going to throw it away." And so he crumpled it up, put it in his pocket, and carried it out, because to him, maybe it was nothing. It was his doodle while he was drinking a cappuccino or whatever it was. But to someone else, he knew what that was going to be worth. He has talents and had talents that no one else had. But just because it only took him 4 minutes to sketch it doesn't mean that it wasn't worth way more than what a lot of people would be willing to pay for a crumpled napkin from a, cafe.
Sure.
The idea that what we have may be worth nothing more than the ink on a crumpled cappuccino napkin, but might be worth more than anybody could possibly imagine is scary as hell. But until we start testing those limits and understanding what it's all about, there's no way, there's really no way of knowing. And coming out of a place in medical device sales where I was, where all of a sudden it was about entertaining, and there was a lot of money, so you could do a lot of really nice things, and you could have nice dinners and take trips and things. And then all of a sudden companies abused those privileges, and it was seen by a lot of people in the Department of Justice that those activities were coercing surgeons to essentially spend government money on through patient healthcare insurance and stuff like that. We had to stop all that. So you had people who've been selling for a long time like, what do you mean I can't buy a surgeon lunch? How am I supposed to sell anything? Okay, well, look, she hasn't stopped eating, but you can't buy the lunch anymore. That doesn't mean that she's stopped doing surgery. It doesn't, like, why are those dots no longer able to be connected because a meal isn't the thing that connects them? But the way they've been doing it for 20 years prior was, you go to dinner, you go to lunch, you pass out your brochure, it's the latest, greatest thing, and then the people just flock to you. And there's this checking out of the real mental work that it takes to sell or grow a business or run a business or coach people or, influence people whatsoever. It's not supposed to be easy. And I think we need to embrace that. And I think Seth gives a very he has a very compelling way of getting that message across.
He does. Here's the thing that bothers me a little bit about this book. And Scott, I'm really interested in your perspective on this. Camille, you as well, because you've just recently gone through a transition. Are we vilifying all corporate entities? I mean, are we talking about the fact is the man the issue here? Or is it really more about kind of an internal reflection? Because the reality is I bet 70% of our listeners work for someone else. They don't do what we do on a day-to-day basis. And there are plenty of people out there making art and doing some really cool things. So where is that balance? Where is that connection?
So the way I see it, and I work for not a big company, but not a one-person shop either, right? We're a decent-sized company. I think it's just trying to get away from the box, right? Thinking beyond, this is what my role is. This is what my job description says, and thinking more broadly. I mean, the way that I always thinking about it is, my approach in general is much more of an entrepreneurial type of approach. It's one where I just look at the contribution, and certainly the main contribution I'm measured on is the amount of revenue that I generate. But that's great. There are other contributions that I can make to the organization. There are other things that I can sort of contribute. And now, to be fair, I've always been this way, and this way is harder. I've worked at ADP, I've worked at Oracle, so I've worked in the multi-billion-dollar, hundreds of thousands employees type of range. Those boxes and the walls on those boxes get thicker. And I think it's more challenging to operate in those ways. So that is why I do gravitate towards smaller organizations where this idea is more embraced. But again, there's nothing wrong with the overarching structure. I think you just have to be able to see past it and not be constrained or limited by those things.
Yeah, or numbed by the process of day-to-day work, right? I think that's
right.
That's the best.
I could tell you all kinds of stories.
Yeah, right. It's like that's the best word I can come up with, is that there's just that kind of constant echo chamber. It's just this reinforcement of, well, no, this isn't the way we do things. We go down this path. That's overgrown. You don't go that way. You go this way.
Yeah.
And
and I think it's not just, you have to be careful of that, because it's not just corporate structures. I think
True.
As industries or as sales podcasts, a lot of times there are sort of, this is sort of the way you're supposed to do it. And, I think there's a lot of opportunity to question those things and, well, wait a minute, maybe there's a better way. Maybe we should just try some more things. And that's where I think that's where the art piece comes out, right? you have to take risks. You have to try things that there's pretty good chances just isn't going to work. That's okay. We're going to get something. We're going to get something out of it. I mean, you guys have both committed to coming to the Sales Success Summit. That's probably premature. I probably shouldn't be doing that yet, according to all sorts of other norms. But, we're going to take the risk and we're going to do it. And a lot of great things are going to come out of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. Camille, what about you? And where does the larger company come into play when thinking about Seth's book?
So I don't think Seth needs me to let him off the hook, but I will say that the way I interpreted his use of the word art was more general in nature and I think he gave us the ability to do that. And not that we needed his ability, we've learned, but he kind of set it up in the fact that art is not just paint on a canvas or music in your ear. It's kind of whatever you're passionate about. And as I read the book, I kept thinking art is not art as I have historically defined, but art is what I find fulfillment in doing every single day. And so as I read the book, that's kind of where my mind was in not the literal interpretation of the word art, as you would look it up in the dictionary, which I'm realizing my kids don't even know what those are anymore. But it's how you interpret it. And that's kind of what it's all about, is this status quo challenge that's where we are in the evolution of industry or of the connection economy. It's all about capitalizing on your strengths and your ability to do things in a creative manner, because your brain is not a finite resource. You can push it to the boundaries and you can get as much out of it as you can even believe you could. There's no limit. And I think that's really what I took away, is not, I can't paint for the life of me. In fact, I nearly got kicked out of an art class in college, but I also can't play an instrument, which is terrible for me to say, but if I could, it would hopefully sound as good as I've been able to be successful in other areas of my life. So that's how I kind of did it.
Right. Well, and he says, if you don't know how, you just learn.
Well, and I think the other takeaway is art is not the result, it's the process.
Mm-hmm.
And as my career has evolved, I think I've learned to embrace the fact that you have to take something from every step of the way. Otherwise, you're not giving it due process, right? You're not giving it the opportunity to even help you, and you can't grow if you don't embrace the fact that sometimes it's going to suck, and sometimes it's not going to be as prescribed, and it's not going to fit in a style box. But when you can push yourself outside of those metrics that you've been kind of ingrained to live within, that's where the real work happens. And that's what I think of when I hear the word art.
Yeah. Oh, that's so poignantly put.
If your art isn't working, then make better art.
And if one person loves it, that means it's art, right?
Yes.
I mean, it doesn't have to be $1 billion Picasso. It can be a great conversation on the phone, or whatever.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And
And Christy, to your point, I'm a phenomenal employee. You want me to work for your company. I'm not a malcontent. I'm typically very, very gruntled, as long as I can do what I need to do and you give me the space to do it. I don't have a problem with policies or standard operating procedures. You tell me what the mission of the company is, and I will, if I agree with that mission and I agree to support that mission, I will with everything I have. I take the blue pill, right? I'm good. So for me, this isn't about being confined. For me, this book was about understanding the greater scope of what has been set up around us and deciding whether or not I want to play ball or I want to have a little more control over it. And I don't take it as a doomsday scenario where the robots are going to overtake us. I don't know what that is, but I think that the reason the robots will never overtake us is because as human beings, we have an ability to connect with other human beings on levels beyond the pure X's and O's or ones and zeros of it. And I think that will never be able to be replaced, at least not in my lifetime or the lifetime of any generation I'll be alive to see. So the opportunity where I saw it was to really just think about those differences. Think about those ways that you can break free of those restraints where it makes sense. This was not a manifesto on why everybody should go into business for themselves. This was not a manifesto on, big data and big corporations, and they're going to go, it's going to be the end of the human race. This was just like, hey, I wondered if you've noticed this, because what is coming is this, it's the watering down of our potential for the safety and security of a biweekly paycheck, mediocre experiences, and, basically we're settling. And, part of the book that's really interesting, and it kind of falls in line with a couple of other things that I've been reading lately, is that, when you do art, when you make art, you have no expectations. It may fall flat on its face. And when it falls flat on its face, you have to kind of protect yourself from that. So you can't get too emotionally caught up in it. Well, by the contrary, when it is a smashing success, you're only as good as your last project, and you got to get back to work. So it just kind of tempers everything out. I think there's a lot of parallels to that in sales. I mean, we're at the end of January here. 30 days ago, the counter went back to zero. Every year I'd sell close to $2 million worth of product, and in January 1st, it was zero, just like everybody else.
Yeah.
$2 million is a lot with ASPs where ours were. And it reinforces that grinding mentality that you do the work because it's worth doing. You don't get hung up on too much on who, how much you're being compensated for it, who's looking. Hopefully it resonates with somebody the way it resonated with you. If it doesn't, then those just aren't your people for that particular piece of work. I don't think this was big companies are bad or anything like that. This was just an opportunity to point out the difference and where our potential is. One of the first things that I noticed when I did leave that company and I started contacting my new clients, essentially, and I started writing a weekly newsletter, and no one had to look at that thing before I pressed send. I pressed send and I'm like, oh my God, did I really say that? Not that I was embarrassed by anything I said, but no one was looking over my shoulder. And it was one of the most liberating feelings I ever imagined. And immediately new possibilities opened up. Because where I was before, we were publicly held. Anything with a company logo on it had to be scrubbed and, not scrubbed, but at least approved. And you need to get a bunch of different, go through a chain of command. And like, look, I'm just trying to talk to my customers. And it's amazing how much you're not able to say in a larger organization because everybody has to be so cognizant of it. And the creative control was the most liberating thing to me. Scary as hell, but liberating at the same time. And I think that's a range of emotions that I think you need to experience to get the get the most out of this.
Jeff, one thing you said, I think a couple of weeks ago when we were talking, is that you need to begin, and the reason I think robots will never take over entirely is you need to begin emotionally, because if you begin literally with the ones and zeros or the X's and O's, then all you have left is price. And I think once we have the ability to forget that there has to be a linear path from A to Z, and that it's dependent on whomever it is you're dealing with, whenever it is you're dealing with them. I think that's, again, art, as we're tying it back right to the book. But I think we can't lose sight of that. And the fact that it's human nature to be emotionally connected with whatever it is we are passionate about.
Well, and Camille, along those lines, my favorite, I took very few quotes from the book. In fact, maybe I only have one real quote. Everything else is kind of paraphrased. The only quote that I captured was, "These people want your humanity, not your discounts."
Wow.
That to me was just, oh my God, right? That's so spot on to what this is, right? It goes back to all of the people do business with people, right? Like, I don't want to transact with a robot. I mean, well, I suppose that's what I do when I buy from Amazon, and I buy many things from Amazon, but that's the commodity stuff, right? When I'm looking for a solution, when I'm looking to solve a really hard problem, that's when I call Jeff and have a conversation. That's what that is about. That's what we're here for. And and to me, that's what the art is, right? The art is those powerful conversations. It's the listening, it's the understanding, it's inventing a solution. It's inventing a new way to sell it and fit within the weird, strange corporate constraints of your clients and their budgets and whatever else.
Right. Well, and it's the beauty too of just letting go of that judgment, both judgment of others and judgment of yourself. And one of the things that I really connected with in the book, probably because it's kind of front of mind for me right now, is there was a lot of talk about resistance. And when you're starting to feel resistance, either from others or from yourself, it typically is that time when you're about to make a breakthrough. And then the other piece shortly after that was around, if you feel like your art isn't good enough, then just make more art. Just keep going. If you don't know how, then learn. Just figure that out, but be so committed to the process and to really delivering the value that's important to you. And the tribe will come, like the people that are going to listen and connect, they're going to come. And that's huge when you think about a lot of small businesses that struggle with picking niches. And there are just so many really unique gems in this book. But I really loved the idea of kind of pushing through the resistance and just doing, just do, because you can't get better if you don't do.
The resistance.
Sorry, Jeff.
No, go ahead.
If you try to force something that's unnatural, it will never work.
Yep. And you'll always feel awkward.
Right. So one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite hotels in New York, on their key cards, they have written, be yourself, everyone else is taken, or something to that effect. And I think we've been sculpted to be, when you work for a corporation or you work for a firm that's not yours and you're not running it your own, to fit in their standards and, want to earn high marks in your annual reviews, and kind of taking the humility out of the day-to-day business of what you were hired to do. And I think as I step into the next phase of my career, one of the things that I'm taking with me that I'm super conscious of is hiring people who are better than you. Like, what you're good at, and you can't be afraid that someone's going to one up you or out, because there's always going to be that person.
Mm-hmm.
So why not surround yourself with those people and let them do what they're best at, just like you've been hired to do what you're best at. And so I think we oftentimes, again, try to fit within somebody else's definition of what you're supposed to be, because that's where you are at the moment. But
Mm-hmm.
you have to kind of break out of that and see through it and be able to realize that you're way more valuable than someone's 1 to 5 scale on productivity.
Yeah. Well, and Camille, you made a comment too. Oh, sorry, Katie, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's our scale, not somebody else's, but it's so much easier to look outside of ourselves to try and measure up. That internal work is a pain in the butt, and none of us like doing it. And yet that's the artistry, and that's the boundary breaking, and that's the risk, but it's also where the joy lives. And I see this every day in terms of the people that I work with, as well as just, peers and colleagues. It is so much easier to stay stuck. So much easier. And the clamoring, the hustle. I'm surrounded more often than not by people who are self-employed, or teeny tiny business owners, as opposed to any kind of a small business like 25 employees. We're talking itty bitty businesses. And we always look around and think, if it's easy for me, it must be easy for everybody. When we were talking about the things that we do, and Picasso scribbling on his napkin, he didn't diminish the fact he was scribbling on a napkin. But if I was scribbling on my napkin, doing something that comes natural to me, which is talking and eating, then I discount that because it's easy. And yet the thing that attracts me, that attracts others to me, is the fact that I love to talk, because there's power in conversation, there's power in connection, there's power in being vulnerable, and that's where we regain our humanity. And when I am being human, I can't help but attract other people to me.
That's absolutely true.
I love that too. And that brings something else up to me, is how many times do we discount what comes easily to us because it comes so easily? And that's the freaking point. Like that's what you double down on. That's not what you write off. That's what makes you significant. That's where the joy lives.
I love that. I love that phrase.
That's the point. Go ahead.
No, that's what I have to say. The joy is the bottom line.
I came from people who showed up to work every day and then left as soon as they possibly could so they could go live life.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we get that opportunity too much anymore, because the machines run longer and more efficiently than we do. And it's time to stop telling ourselves that that's good enough. And it's time to start understanding what our own significance is and how we can use that to help others find theirs. And that's, it doesn't always work. That's the point. You're dancing on the edge of fear, significance, and success beyond your wildest dreams. The sooner we're able to embrace that, the better.
Right.
It's like trying to teach your kid to ride a bike. Oh, you really want to ride a bike? No, well, that's scary. I could fall off. Yeah, you could fall off, but you don't know what it's like to feel the wind in your hair. You don't know what it's like to get to your friend's house. You don't know what it's like to have the freedom to just go someplace and not have someone's eye on you all the time. My kids are at that age, and it's from a parenting standpoint, right? Like, do I want to take the training wheels off? Like, is it time? Are they going to, where do we do this? But the exhilaration that comes from success is so much more significant when you don't expect it, when you don't expect it to succeed. And the highs are high. The volume is turned up on everything when you're willing to color outside the lines. And yes, it's scary. That's the point. That's why more people don't do it. And that's why there's so much more to be gained by being one of those people who is willing to. The War of Art, Stephen Pressfield, another really great book. And that's where the term, of course, in my screen, it's backwards, so no one can read it. But I put the link in the chat room notes here. But that's where the concept of the resistance comes from.
Mm-hmm.
Godin refers to Pressfield a lot. That's the book that it came from. It's real good. The Infinite Game. Scott, tell me what you know about the Infinite Game.
Well, I wanted to call this out. I was really intrigued by this, and this was the thing that I really wanted to go back to and didn't quite get there. But he talks a little bit about this idea that we shouldn't look for the zero sum, right? Where it's I win, you lose, but you look for the infinite game. And I have other notes here, and I don't remember if they're from the book or it was just other ideas, because I wrote
we don't ever follow a script anyway. Just throw them out there.
Well, I just, I wrote down referrals and try to give and help the most. And Jeff, this reminded me about some things that you've written about real recently as well. And I think there's so much opportunity in this and thinking this way, right? How it's at all, at the end of the day, it's about how do we make the pie bigger, right? How do we create a situation where everybody comes away winning rather than I have to win, and in order for that to happen, you have to lose, or a lot of people have to lose.
I'll say I did a lot of highlighting around infinite game and the theory of that, and I think I just mentioned that I'm looking for hiring people who are smarter than me and better at certain things, and I think the goal of the infinite game is to not have the last man standing syndrome, but is to find people, and the goal of the infinite game is to bring out the best in people to make them better. And that really is I think the definition of it. And why we I think we've been, again, programmed or taught that you need to win. And now I don't agree with the ball-less game of soccer ball that they're starting to play. I heard somewhere they're trying to teach kids how to play soccer without a ball so that there's no goal, so that there's no winner or loser.
Oh, Lord.
Does everybody still get a trophy?
I don't believe in that, for the record, but I do believe in like when it's not a game, when it's your career and your life, that you shouldn't be a winner or a loser as deemed by any person other than you. And for you to, and at least for me to feel successful in my life, that means I'm going to help other people be successful in theirs. And it's contrary to having grown up as an athlete where you do have a winner and a loser. And I've, as we discussed, Scott, taken an affection to riding a bike, which I think, again, it's a perfect example of the evolution of me and how there is no winner or loser when you jump on. You want to finish, and that's the goal. And you get out of it as much as you put in. And I think the idea of the infinite game is just that, is pulling the best out of people no matter what.
Not to be a winner or a loser. The goal is not to be a winner or a loser, but to matter.
And we do so much more together than we do alone.
It's not a zero-sum game. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, my favorite quote, Jeff's heard this 100 times already, is Zig Ziglar. And he says, if you want to accomplish everything you want in life, you have to help enough people get what they want in life. And I think that's huge. That's why the net weaving group is, you know, so successful. It's because it's not about trying to find some network with somebody who can do something for you. It's about networking with someone to say, hey, what is it that you do so that I can connect you with people who can help you get what you want? It'll all come around eventually. And that's the long-term infinite game.
I agree. My
All right.
Peloton is totally an infinite game. Scott's just peppering.
I can't, I'm trying to can't read the chats at the same time here.
Well, Chris,
my Peloton, I love it.
Yeah, Camille was talking about the bike being an infinite game, and mine is because it's a stationary bike. So infinite, I go very far, but I go nowhere.
Excellent.
How do you take a stationary bike to get ice cream? That's what I want to know.
So Camille, I have more expensive bikes than I have art in my house. So if you ever need any advice, let me know.
Is that on what to buy or what not to buy?
As either.
Yeah, I've
it's an expensive endeavor.
No, I know. And I haven't pulled the trigger yet, so I don't know what I'm waiting for, but it'll come to me when it's supposed to.
Excellent.
My bikes always have a really weak engine. I don't know what the deal is there. I feel like that's what needs the investment, not so much the bike.
Excellent. That's awesome. Well, you know, guys, we're coming up just over an hour now. And not that I want to put a box around this conversation, but I'm going to pull it full circle. But, you know, I think it would be good to kind of go around and give some closing thoughts. Anything that you didn't get a chance to cover, or just perspectives. Scott, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so I mean, really the call outs that I got a chance to make, again, maybe the benefit of only having read it once is I had fewer takeaways, and I kind of want to dig deeper into those. So again, the idea of connection economy and attention and trust. And then the quote that these people want your humanity and not your discounts. I mean, there's just such gold in those things, and sometimes less is more with books. You know, I think you have to. We all take different things at different times. I'm sure if I reread this again in 6 months, I'd be in a very different place and have a very different perspective. And this is definitely one of those books where you're going to pull something completely different out that's going to meet you where you are.
I love it. Katie, what about you?
My biggest takeaway is the concept of listening to the book narrated by Seth himself. I generally purchase my nonfiction books in a hardback as opposed to Kindle or digital or any of those kinds of things. But Jeff made a good point where that emphasis of pausing just before a significant point is being made is attractive to me. My other takeaway is by listening in on a discussion of the book, I'm once again reminded of the power of conversation.
Yes, absolutely. Camille, what about you?
I would say my key takeaways are that there's never a better time than now. And the longer you wait, the easier it is to delay what it is you're intended to do. For me, I think I've learned that I would way rather be a linchpin than a cog. And everything I do these days is going to be approached with that in mind. And that art is personal, and so is life, and that's kind of how anything works. And remember that if you're in sales, you're selling to people. You're not selling a product or service. You're just trying to solve a problem. So that's what I got out of the book.
Okay. And Jeff, I know this wasn't your first time, but what gems did you pull out this second time around or third time around?
10th time.
10th time around.
Fly higher.
Yeah.
Not just because you can, not just because you have to, but because you should.
Yeah. I love it. You guys are all so eloquent. So what I took away is that resistance is futile, because if you are put on this earth for something, fighting it is just going to make life harder. And I'm so glad, Jeff, that you were instrumental in putting this book in front of me. I think that it's going to be something I'm going to think about for a long time to come. And I think the quote that I love the most, Camille, I think you pulled it out, which was, art is not the result, it's the process. And I think that's it speaks to me in so many different ways. And this podcast is a prime example. I think if I look at some of the conversations we had 2 years ago and just kind of the process going through this, this has been such a growth experience for me. And I love the book club discussion. I think this is going to have to be a very regular occurrence. We may have to see if we can read faster and do more than one.
We should do it next month.
That's right. You think? So, so with that, we'll kind of wrap this up.
It's 3:01. Can you believe you went past?
Yes, I know. Look at that.
Thank you.
So, the book for February is going to be Extreme Ownership. And we have got some really powerful interviews, success story interviews and thought leader interviews around preparation. So the month of February, the theme is preparation. The book is going to be Extreme Ownership. You do have to register for each one of these. So if you want to come back and join us, please do. This was a fabulous conversation. Katie, I hope you'll come back and see us again.
Oh, yeah.
And Katie and I are going to figure out, we live like 5 miles from each other, so we're going to have to figure out how to meet up.
You should ride your bike over there.
I should ride my bike over, yes.
That's going to happen.
Not at 40 degrees. It's not
Go
happening.
get some ice cream.
Absolutely. So with that, I think we'll wrap it up. Thank you so much, Camille, Katie, Scott, and as always, Jeff, for coming on for the very first live book club discussion on the Why and the Buy podcast. And remember, if you are listening to the podcast, go out, give us a review. We'd love to, those are like gold for us, and we love to see what you guys put together. Also, don't hesitate to email us. Jeff and I jumped on a coaching call just the other day, and it was just a fun experience with a brand new salesperson, somebody that was going through some challenges, and we spent about 20 minutes just talking through, and that's what we love to do. So interact with us, go out to the website, tool around, give us some suggestions. If you've got guests that you want to have us bring on the podcast, let us know. And Jeff, with that, any closing thoughts?
We should do this again.
We are gonna. February 27th at 1 p.m. And we'll put the link up on the website.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Thanks everybody.
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you, guys.
Because when you know your whys, your hows and your whats get much better. Because
You
even
know
on
they
book
do.
clubs, we say silly taglines.
We love our silly
love you.
tagline.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks, guys. Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.